So, ahoy. That's my best check. Okay, so I'm hoping that the check is really perfect as well, because I think it's Simona who did it, so thank you, Simona. I hope it's nothing too rude. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what amash is. It's a funny old word. But I'd just like to thank all the organizers here first, because, you know, it really does take a lot of effort and energy to do this. And I'm sure that they've all lost a bit of weight since. So well done to Igor, Karel, Simona, and everybody else. Wow, what a fantastic job. I hope you all agree. Thank you. Let's give a round of applause. That'd be lovely. Well done, guys. Well done. So we're really looking forward to sharing our work. You know, we've only been going for 16 months in the UK. We started in January last year, and I got the idea because I'm also a therapist, but I'll tell you a little bit about Miles Johnston, who's my colleague on this project, and myself in a moment. But it took quite a bit of doing. I kind of started it about 6 months earlier, but didn't move on it. And I knew there was a missing component, and the missing component was that bit of getting the information out there to the public in a very material way. And that's where Miles Johnston came in. So we do video one-to-one interviews with people, as well as other interviews of our work. And our work is talking to contactees, abductees, this obscure world. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about how we got started. And, you know, it's amazing. We've kind of developed legs, as they say in England. And what that means is that the work itself seems to be running ahead of us. There's so much going on. And already in the UK, it's not just in the UK actually, but although we are a UK resource, we've had at least 70, and perhaps it's 80 by now, calls or contacts via email, phone, or Skype from people, mainly experiences, I might say. And when I use the word experiences, I mean those people who are having anomalous experiences. Anomalous meaning we don't know really what it is. We don't have any set rules about what this means for us, so we're exploring it. So experiences covers a whole wide field, from contactees to abductees to people who are perceiving that they are having some mind control issues, which may be a new concept for some of you, that mind control is an element from time to time in this field, and it certainly is, but we'll deal with that one a little bit later. So the principal objective behind amash is firstly to offer a much needed service. And I'm in the UK, so we're in the UK, although I have to tell you, we've had contact now from the USA, from Canada, we've had Germany, France, Italy, even South Korea, and latterly Russia, talking to us about the work we're doing. And there seems to be a real resonance for this, and people are saying, gosh, how fantastic. For the first time, I'm able to talk to someone who doesn't want to section me, and in England what that means is put you into a mental asylum, or send you to the psychiatrist. Having said that, there are some who made the mistake, as they said, of going to or through the allopathic medicinal system, and that's our normal drug-orientated medicine system, only to find that they are institutionalized sometimes, put on medication, and often that medication is something that becomes mandatory, that they have to take it, because otherwise certain government funding or aspects of their life will not be there. So it's a huge subject for people. And I know it's very, very difficult when you haven't had the personal experience yourself to possibly imagine what this could be like. So that's another reason that we put together amash. We felt it important that experiencers have a sympathetic ear and could speak for the first time, perhaps, without fear of ridicule, without rejection. So we're something of a lifeline for many. I've had people who've said to me that This is the first time they've spoken about their experiences in 12 years, or 10 years, many years. And it's the first time a lot of them have really plucked up courage to do this. And again, it's very difficult for us to imagine why it would take courage to do this. I can only tell you that when you have these experiences, for which we have no rules, for which we have no frame of reference, it is very difficult to find a place in your head, in your life, in the social structure of where this all fits. So we're about researching what this means and where it's going for humanity, because this is huge. This is really huge. As I think all my colleagues have said, everybody has said that this has high impact for humanity. And what I'm interested in, particularly with the work of Amash, is lifting the lid on some of the covertness of it. That's bringing it out into the open. And sometimes it means discussing issues that are very uncomfortable for us, quite challenging. But my belief as a therapist too is if we bring these elements out, learn to understand them, then we will have a healing, we will have a neutralization of the traumatization, which is important. A lot of our experiences have come to us because they have seen our work, because they have seen something in the paper about us. We seem to be gaining attention in the UK, slowly by slowly. And they haven't felt safe before, but I think there is some resonance on the planet also that is triggering people to come forward, to remember as well. It's quite interesting because in the autumn of 2010, quite a few people who I've spoken to who are experiencers suddenly seem to have a download of information, which is really interesting. And information often contained memories of craft and beings and what have you, but we'll come on to those a bit later. So I don't know quite what happened in the autumn of 2010, but quite a few people have referenced that time. So maybe something for somebody else to have a look at there. So we're very interested in the impact that these events actually have on experiences, both psychologically and physically. It's come to our attention when talking and just chatting informally to people who have had anomalous experiences, that they have physical aspects or outcomes to their experience as well, and it's not great. So I'm very intrigued by this because I've been a researcher in health and wellness and various systems of healing for quite a number of years, and I'm quite interested to know why that is and what we can do about it. I actually don't think it's really okay for this interaction to take place and us not to be taken care of in the process. So I'm very much about uncovering what this means and finding a way that we can become more interactive, let's call it. The first part of our name, just to, because it's a bit of an odd word, it addresses the aspect of mind control. So that's the AMM bit, so that's anomalous mind management. And we use that phrase particularly because mind control is more limiting as a concept, but anomalous mind management is really talking about the manipulation and the management of our mental, psychological, and perhaps spiritual direction and processes. And indeed, those do come to bear, as I said, on some of our experiences. Not all, by any means, but certainly quite a degree. And of course, then the C, the AC and the H's, abductee and contactee. And what we also do is fund a helpline, which is the H. We fund a helpline which is, serves as a first port of call for anyone in the UK, and in fact outside of the UK now, to call us. And we tend to then Skype, email, get information, find out how we can help, how we can best support these people. And you'd be surprised, you would be very surprised to know how many people there are. I guess since we had a media event recently, which I'll tell you about in a moment, I guess we're looking at something in the region of about 5 people a week. It's really ramping up. It's really, it's really interesting. So I just want you to tell you a little bit about us. I'll give you, because you won't know who we are, a brief overview of our backgrounds. I initially trained in theatre and media, and I also did a bit of teaching, and I have a teaching qualification working with adults in adult education, which I began to use when I was teaching healing, meditation, and different healing modalities. I've also been working with people who have been traumatized from various cases, and so as well as bereavement counselling. So I've got quite a wide background in the care, alternative energy, and I'm also, well, that's another area I'm very interested in, but also the energy medicine side of it. With my training as a therapist, this has also, again, been a real insight into the human psychology. Way before MASH was even a gleam in my eye, I had a couple of clients who came to me for therapy sessions who both differently had experiences of being in an ET form previously, in previous incarnations, where they saw their planet being destroyed. And one of the people, it was quite interesting, would perhaps get up in the night for a toilet break and be washing their hands and look up in the mirror in front of them and see an ET face. And this completely traumatized them. They knew they weren't seeing things, and it maintained as well. So we did quite a bit of work around that to try and understand why that energy was coming in now. Miles Johnston, my colleague. Oh, I think I've gone a bit too far on that one. Bear with me a second. Oh no, perhaps we've gone out of sync. All right, let me just talk about this one then. On April the 6th of this year, we had a major media interest in us, and the Sun newspaper is a tabloid in the UK. And I did an interview with a syndicated media company, and I was really nervous about it, I must say, because I knew that I could be letting myself in for all kinds of uncomfortable reactions from that. I'm quite glad they didn't put my picture there and they put the picture of ET. I think that says it a lot better. So, as it says, seen ET, question mark, phone us at home. And of course that relates to us providing a phone number for experiencers to contact us. And it just talks about that. Now, we had an absolute storm of every idiot in the UK ringing for about 3 days. They had a really good time claiming that they'd been taken by aliens. And of course, you know, you do get your hoaxes, but I have to tell you that up until this point, I have not met, in all honesty, I can say I have not met anybody, especially anybody we've interviewed, who has been a hoax. And that's quite interesting because it shows the quality also of the people coming forward and the people that are still coming forward. So people say, well, how do you know? You know, we always have a disclaimer on the front of our videos, front of our interviews, which says that we're doing this from a compassionate, truthful point of view, and we're doing it in the name of research, because the more we find out, the more we hear people's testimonies and reports about what has been their real experience, often from their very young lives, the more that we can understand, the more we can become empowered, and that's what I'm very interested in. So we did have a really interesting flurry there as a reaction to us being in the paper. But we've had a couple of calls from people like the BBC as well, and they wanted us to send some of our people along to America, which they thought was really great because they were getting their expenses paid, to be kind of caged up for 2 weeks with a skeptic, and for them to prove to them their experiences were real. Well, what nonsense. What nonsense. That time is over. We are not standing on a stage with skeptics. There is so much evidence. You've already heard quite a lot of it today, and you'll hear more, I'm sure, over the weekend. So we're not about exposing people to that kind of thing. Our people are people who have the courage to come through our doorway, and especially to be filmed by us. We stand by them at 100%, and I absolutely salute their courage and bravery. I think it's amazing. So this graphic now is relevant to Miles Johnston, who is my colleague and videographer and director of the filming that we do. Miles has, for many years, been filming people who have had anomalous experiences, and he has a particular interest in what's become known as the jinn, that is the Middle Eastern aspect of entities that are coming forward, very prevalent in the Middle Eastern culture, and also super soldiers. And super soldiers comes with mind control issues and all the rest of that, which we're not going to go into today, but our work very well complements each other. So Miles and I invite people around to do our interviews with us, and we hope that, that they really find it a positive experience too, because the last thing we want to do is re-traumatize anyone. So I'm showing you this graphic because I thought it was quite amusing. Miles and his colleague, Colin Wolford, who's also a researcher here with us this weekend, went to Phoenix in February this year to the UFO Congress. And Jaime Maussan, who is the very well-known Mexican presenter, is using our logo. But we didn't know about that, and we were quite surprised. And we just said, well, it would have been nice if he'd have said, you know, that's yours, because we specially commissioned this, or ordered it from a guy called Paul Harvey, who's absolutely fantastic with art, and he created this graphic for us. So if ever you see this graphic around, it belongs to Amash, and you can use it with a credit, please. So I just thought that was amazing that even when we don't know it, Amash is getting out there. We had our first meeting in May last year. In fact, it was Friday, May the 13th, and we were meeting in a Masonic hall. And none of that was intended, but it's just quite interesting. And in that meeting, we had a few people there, and none of them were going to speak, because the idea was we would meet, have a social time for an hour, so the other experiencers could meet one another, and then we were going to film some testimonies, just a short 5 or 10 minutes here and there. And then it didn't look like it was going to happen because, as I said, for these experiences to speak, sometimes for the first time on record, as they say, it's really a big deal. You know, if you've got families, you've got a social position, you've got things you need to speak of or think of in the material world, this, as we well know, can certainly cause a lot of difficulties. So we've had this young man that you can see at the front. He's only 22, I believe, 22 or 24. And both him and his sister, who's a couple of years older, have been having experiences since about 7 years old. Up at the top there, we've got Miles, myself, and David Griffin, who may be known to Carol and perhaps Igor and some of the other exopolitics people here. And the other gentleman on the right there, or on your left, is David Hodrian, and he runs something called BUFOG, which is the Birmingham, which is in the UK, UFO group. And he also does a lot of work with contactees, and he provides, if you like, a private chat room for people, experiencers, once a month, which is really, really fantastic. It's another resource we have, you know, because America has always led the way in this field, in research, in good research, on this, in this very different and difficult field sometimes. So we're very grateful for all of that, but we needed something going on in the UK. So I really hope by this next testimony you'll hear Scott, who is a dad of 2, who was really concerned about saying anything on tape. He said, you know, Joanne, he said, I'm a coach for the little guys, for my sons and their, you know, the village. And he said, I really can't go on tape and talk about this. I said, well, that's fine, don't. We wouldn't dream of pressuring anybody. But we do try and counsel people into a way of thinking about the positive effect and aspects of this, if they do. But anyway, he decided to speak, and let's hope we can hear it. It's only about 3 minutes.
this is where it gets strange. Me and my middle son, do you want to go out there again, son? Yeah. So we dive back in the van and we drive out to the barn. The fog by this time is so thick. We're there 5 minutes, got a maximum of 20 minutes. Come home. When we had left, my wife and my eldest son were watching Mamma Mia. That was a Christmas present that we bought her. And by the time we got back, my youngest son was in bed, wife was in bed, and my son was halfway through a comedy special. We didn't put two and two together at the time. I then reported this as a sighting. Got in touch with Dave Hodrian, and Dave came over, and Dave was in the house when we actually found out exactly what it was that had happened. My wife was able to explain, and my son was able to explain, that we hadn't been gone for 20 minutes, and we hadn't taken the van. We had walked with the dog, and we'd been gone for over 2 hours. The next few months was hell. It was absolute torture. Trying to assimilate this now into my reality was impossible. My mind took a hammering, and the experiences didn't stop. Nothing negative. There's no negativity whatsoever. The only negativity I found was from the reaction from friends, supposed to be best friends. I lost my business through trying to deal with this. Nearly lost my wife. It was just torture, to be quite honest with you. Believe it or not, I am coping now. But it's been hard. I agree with what Simon says. There is a soul level to this, and this is a thing that I think a lot of people have become completely detached from, is the fact that we aren't just physical beings. There's something inside every single one of us. And I was shown myself, shall we say, introduced to myself. Thank you, cheers. And it's been great getting to know myself through it.
So you can see the emotional impact that had on Scott. And, you know, he wouldn't talk about a lot of the aspects of his experiences, certainly not on camera, and even then, not to us, not all of them. But I want you to note that whatever traumatization people have experienced, they also seem to come out the other end having had a spiritual awakening, a spiritual movement, very strong movement in their being, and this colors everything. But as you heard from him, how hard it is. You know, he lost his business. Friends and family found it very challenging to accept him, and yet he's no different than he was before. Well, he'll be slightly different, but you know, he's not a different person, essentially. So you can see then the very great challenge that we all have here as researchers and presenters of this material, let alone the experiences, in trying to find a middle ground in a way to present this that is acceptable to everybody also, because some of the work does have some challenging aspects, but there is always, always, in any challenge we face, a positive attitude. It is often our response rather than reaction that tells the tale. Now, in this next short clip, which is just under an hour, we have a gentleman who I'm going to feature a little bit today called Simon Parkes. Simon's been making a little bit of a wave in the UK recently for one reason or another, which I'll go into shortly. But he's just going to be talking slightly now about a particular type of entity that he has had lifelong association with, and they're called the mantis, or he calls them the mantids. It's quite interesting, his background too, because Simon's mother used to work for the British Security Services, known as MI5, as a secretary. Prior to that, she was working as a secretary to a solicitor's company, and they would have this gentleman come in who was a multilinguist, who would come in often from Germany, interestingly enough, and bring her documents, as was arranged with the company, for her and her alone to type up because she was so excellent at her work. In the end, the work was so much that they asked her if she would work from home and she would receive 2 salaries. She was forced to sign the Official Secrets Act. She was forced to do that under pain of death to her son and herself. And when she asked if she could, change and go back to her old job anytime, they said, yes, of course. But if you ever speak about it, you'll be dead. That's pretty final. Anyway, she did this work for a few months. And I just think it's very interesting because there's often something in the generations that are indicators about what's happening to an experiencer. So let's see what Simon has to say. It's only short, as I say, less than a minute.
My name is Simon. I'm 51 years of age, and I've been around these creatures for 51 years of my life. Or rather, these creatures have been around me. I didn't go seeking them. They came to find me. It's all about the genetics. It's all about the DNA. That's what they're really interested in.
So are they interested in that as for the betterment of humanity, or are they creating another race? Are they, that we hear happens, hybrids term frequently used? Is that in your awareness?
I can only tell you the faction of extraterrestrials that deals with me. I know for a fact from what they've said there are different groups all signed up to different factions, and each faction will have its own way of doing it, but they've all signed up to the same agenda.
So there's an agenda going on. Well, I guess we knew that much from all that we've heard so far. We don't know what this agenda is exactly. We know that hybridization goes on. And what that means is there is clearly gene manipulation going on, DNA manipulation, and I suspect that this has been going on from the year dot, from my own research, which may be a challenging thing to take on board for some, but the evidence seems to be showing that as the case. So I really would like to say that talking about disclosure, we hear a little bit about disclosure, and one or two colleagues are hoping that it's going to come through the government. Well, I think we're already in disclosure. I think that these experiences are one of the routes, one of the main routes of disclosure. And then all my colleagues and the other people you'll hear tomorrow, it's all disclosure. So I think we are it. I think we are the official disclosure unit. Anyway, this next bit is a little bit longer, this next clip. And in it, I'm going to refer to an email that I had from an American lady. It was an extremely lengthy email, but I wanted to share it because there are some aspects of people's experiences that, as I said before, are quite challenging. And nobody finds them easy. But it's like any sore or boil or anything we have in our bodies that's causing us grief or a discomfort. Once the poison is out of the system, the body will heal. And I think that happens on every single level, psychologically, spiritually, and every which way. And it's only by revealing this information, it's only by sharing it, can we possibly get to understand better and become more empowered about what is going on and what these agendas are. So this is also, you'll see Simon. He was very kind and allowed us and very trusting. I have to tell you, these people are very trusting of us. Really very trusting. And you know, that really needs noting. Just 1 second and let me get this going. You'll see Simon going through a little bit of a therapy session that I did with him. And in this therapy session, he's relating some material which you may find a little bit difficult, but you can ask me about it later if you wish. Oh, I'm sorry. I think I've just gone on too far there. Just 1 second, we'll get back. I fizzled out. Let's see if I can get myself back. I recently received, just last week, so that will be the end of October 2011, an email from a lady in America. And as you can see, it's a really long, and this is several pages long, of an email that she said, and I just want to read you one or two bits because this is really important and interesting too. It says, "I'm writing to say that everything that Simon Park says," and this is a bit about a really challenging piece of information about what happens to some children, is absolutely true. And she says, "I know this because at the moment I'm in tears from watching the work that you've done with Simon, and I know about these Egyptian rituals. Everything he said is 100% true."
Oh no, there's some horrible, horrible images.
Can you tell me what they are?
They're not nice. I can tell you.
Okay.
Children being tortured, killed.
Where is this?
It's here on Earth.
Who's doing this?
They are.
These beings?
And are they doing it at this time, back in the...
No, they're showing me showing me my life. They're showing me what I should be, what I should become. This is the life that I am in. This is who I should be. This is my heritage.
Okay, and
that's what I'm being told.
what is it about these horrible images? What is it?
Because I reject them.
Right.
I don't want to be that. I choose not to be.
Are they showing you these images because this is their way of life, or is it
It's their ritual and their ceremony and their culture.
right?
It's not gratuitous violence, it's the culture, the ritual and the ceremony. And this is what they do and this is what they stand for. And I am a part of that, and I should be taking part in it, and I am not with them. I should be with them, and they don't understand why I'm not with them.
The writer of the email also talks about a ritual and describes the main participants as being an Egyptian king known as Ptah, who with 4 servants, or if they're not servants, they're contributors to the next action, who during a ceremony where a child is brought in terror, who is then put on a slab, and a force field is then created around the slab so the child can't move but is totally conscious and aware. There then ensues a ritual in which these 5 beings, the king and these 4, chant and incant and feed off the terror, finally culminating with a look to this person who's written the email, who was participating at one point in this previous
what
life.
I'm talking about there
They
is
can't touch the child.
this lady's participation in a previous life which she remote viewed.
The child to them, in which ensues
This child which was brought in was put on a slab like a long table, and a force field stopped it moving. It was absolutely in terror, this child, and it was then the subject of the next part, which was incantation by this King Ptah, as this American lady told us it was, and these 4 other beings, people, humans, I don't know exactly what they were, and they began to chant and incantate, which is to sing songs, obviously building up the energy and building up the energy, until they had actually drained the child of its terror. And then they turned to look at her. Her sole job in this activity was to hand them the child. She was the only one who could do it. They were unable to touch the child. When they did that, when she did that and she was handed the child to them, they fed off it. So it's shocking. This was from a previous life, remote viewed, but she knows very well that this was part of an ancient Egyptian ritual process. Now, the very interesting thing that she said at the end was that as these beings feasted on the body, having taken all the terror energy out, they shapeshifted into reptilian beings. And again, The idea of shape-shifting has been made more common or popular with the work of David Icke, bringing to mind that kind of thing. Indeed, and as someone else mentioned earlier on today, one of my colleagues, we're talking about dealing in different dimensions all the time, and we're not schooled in this, we're not taught about this. This is all still new to us. It's like we're in kindergarten and we're just getting a look at this. And so it's really no surprise that forms can change and shift. It's like if you think of ice and water, and then water going into steam. It's all the same thing, different frequency, different vibration. So by that simple analogy, it just gives you an idea of the very many layers that this goes into across the ages. And I think part of our work is about healing the miasm, and that is the injuries sustained and the trauma sustained over the generations, right back into our deepest history. And I think when we all are able to be healed down our generational lines, and then we can really move upward in our consciousness. So we're about helping to facilitate that. So we do come across some fairly shocking information, and that was awful. But we also have cases where abuse, sexual abuse, ritualistic, satanic abuse is used to generate energy, especially sexual energy, of course, because it's so powerful, to as a source of energy. However, that is used by various parties, and I'm not really thinking that that's okay. So I'm about helping these people to find their own power, to feel comfortable with who they are, because a lot of these experiences can bring a great sense of shame, a great sense of incapacity to deal with life. A lot of our people suffer with post-traumatic stress syndrome, which war veterans have often. And you think, my goodness, this is an extraterrestrial event. This is an event, an extra-dimensional event, let's say. Because extraterrestrial, they're not all extraterrestrial either. Some are just interdimensional. Some may be right in front of us, 2 inches away from our face, on another dimension, another frequency. It's just like tuning into a different radio station. We don't have two going at the same time, generally. So, as I said, I'm featuring Simon a little bit at the moment because something very peculiar happened in mid-March, just this year, March 17th, in fact. Simon was traveling with a passenger who was also a fellow experiencer, taking her to the airport from the north of England. And he had a very bad, very serious road traffic accident, which was caused by somebody intentionally ramming the car. Ramming means that they would purposely turn the vehicle in the direction in which he was going. And Simon also happens to be a driving instructor, so he could deflect the worst of it, but unfortunately could not deflect the accident. Both cars were a total write-off, as we call it in the UK. That means they were completely destroyed. The perpetrator's car flipped over and over, causing a massive road traffic accident. Simon and his passenger had to be cut out of the car, and they were lucky to escape with bruises, some shock, and some whiplash injuries. The other guy got out of the car as if he was completely mind-controlled, which he might have been, with a can of Coke in his hand. How he did that, I don't know, because his car flipped over and over. And he just said, oh, I don't think I meant to do that. Which is strange. So immediately after that, within about 4 days, obviously, Simon has found courage and is beginning to talk about his experiences more openly. For the first time, he was one of those people in 2010, in the autumn there, who seemed to have an instant download and recall of memory, although he'd been having flashbacks, which is often the case with people. And he just took a stance. He's just said, listen, this is me. These are my experiences. You can accept them, not accept them, but I'm going to talk about them. Now is the time. So, wow, that's very brave. Anyway, within 4 days, the local papers were getting hold of him, and clearly, because I couldn't understand why there was all this media frenzy about his story, after the accident. I said, how do those two marry up, those two incidents? And he said, well, they didn't manage to kill me. So the traffic accident police contacted the press, and he said, I do happen to know that the major paper is run by a high-ranking Freemason. And they were the ones who called me and tried to discredit me, basically. He said, but you know what? I told my story anyway. Even the Fortean Times, which is a well-known paper in the UK, magazine, came on board. And it's quite interesting because he was in the Scarborough Evening Post was the one with the Freemason at the top, and I think most of them have. But they have a circulation of about 11,000 readers. And then he was in a free paper in London, and that has an 800,000 circulation. So I really rather get the feeling that these people have shot themselves in the foot, in that they haven't killed him, they haven't persuaded him to stop talking about it. And not only that, in February of this year, Simon was voted onto the local council as a Labour councillor. And so now they all know about him, and he's still there. He's still just hanging on in there. So this information is getting out there whether we like it or not, and a lot of it is down to the bravery of people like Simon coming forward. I'd also like to say that he has been incredibly helpful and supportive of our work and also helping other people. I mean, we had a Japanese television company ask if they could use part of the Simon Parkes interview, which they thought was very important, and what would we charge for that usage. And Mars and I have decided we're not charging anybody any usage for any of our work in this way because it's so important that we get it out there. We do hope that funding will come from another place, but not that one. So, as I said, Simon's been really amazing. Now, I wanted to share with you a case from a lady who is in Canada. This is one of the cases that cuts across a lot of the different areas that we hear about. And I'm going to read some of the material that she sent to me. So just bear with me for one moment. So these people were out camping. There were 2 adults and 2 children. They were having a lovely time. And the lady has a degree in anthropology. She's also, she does counselling for people with post-traumatic stress and people who've been in abuse situations. And she said her experiences only really began coming to light when she began, through some therapy work, to have some Gestalt hypnotherapy. And she said then she remembered that her mother was speaking about these experiences. And this is interesting because we often find there is a generational element. That is, that it goes down the family line of people having experiences with ETs, UFOs, sightings, abductions, contacts, what have you. So she's talking about her mother. And she was just saying that her mother used to be terrified of the blue doctors. And she'd suffered a nervous breakdown as a consequence of all these interactions, so much so that the husband, who had also had, so this would be her father, who had also had experiences, could not face it. And they basically sectioned her. They would put her into a mental institute. She'd have shock therapy and medication so she could forget. Because you start talking about this kind of thing, that where is the support? Where is the support for people like this? There isn't any. Again, that's why we're bringing this to the fore, because we don't want people to be institutionalized. We don't want people to feel isolated and alone and no one to talk to. Sometimes just talking can be of the greatest benefit. So anyway, she goes on to talk about her experience. But first of all, she describes a time when she was about 5 years old, and she was in a flying saucer. And she said, we were flying way above a field, and there was a light. You could see there was a light through the bottom of the craft that she was in, because it was also clear, so she could see through it. And they went over cows, and suddenly the cows, as she called it, became empty. It's a bit like the cows had everything taken from them. And she said the cows didn't run away, they just stayed there, and it would happen again and again. I don't know if that is quite the same as the mutilations that you hear about associated with cattle and other animals, but it's obviously something nearby. And then she talked about the time when they came in the same craft, they came across a railway. And on the track, or by the track, was a truck with a man and a woman outside, standing outside just looking up transfixed. And the woman appeared to be screaming, but she couldn't hear her screaming, she said. It just looked like she did from the way she was moving. And she said, this little one of 5 years old said, "Don't worry, don't be afraid, there's lots of us up here." And there were men, women, children, a baby crying. And so I noticed that quite often abductees are trained in the management of other abductees and help them feel at home often, which is really interesting, you know, because you wonder how far that goes back. So she had that experience as a child, and then she said, also I remember on that ship seeing these cylinders, glass cylinders, many, many, many of them, and they were all filled with different stages of growth of babies in an amber fluid. And again, this is not uncommon. It's very common to hear about the babies, the children, and even people in these tanks of fluid. So in talking about the hybridization process, it seems like it's been well underway for a long time. So this lady was describing her major memory, which was this Sunshine Bay area in British Columbia, Canada. And she was just saying, they were all sitting down after a lovely day, and it was night, they were looking up at the stars, and her companion began to be transfixed by what appeared to be this ring of clouds that sort of turned a pink, and there seemed to be a heat mirage coming from it, a heat effect. And then he began to get very nervous and very scared and dragged her back to the tent and said, "No, no, no, we've got to go in, we've got to go in." And she was a little bit surprised. And obviously some change had gone on, but it was also sudden. So they're inside the tent now. She's suddenly wondering, gosh, where are the children? Why are they so quiet? Where are they? And there were no answers to any of that at this moment in time. And her companion began tying down frantically the windows of the tent and then using clothes pegs to secure them further. And then she saw a huge bright light just outside. And she said, "Oh, I'm going to have a look." He said, "Please, please don't." And he began crying, really crying. He said, "Please don't, please don't." And she did just go outside, and she looked outside, and she saw a huge light in the sky, trailing a big beam of light. And this light was trailing right up to where their tent was. And that was all she remembered till the next day. So she said the next time she knew anything, it was noon the next day, so 12 p.m. And she just thought, gosh, where are the children? There was a big campfire, much bigger than it should have been for the time of year. And she said, well, gosh, how did that get made? She didn't remember anything of that. And then she remembered something about her tummy, and she began to look down at her stomach. It was hurting. And about the belly button area, there was a big, deep burn mark. She had about the size of her ring finger, the pad of a ring finger. And it was quite deep and layered, and it hurt very much. And she said, all of a sudden, she said, I don't know what happened, but she said, I just began screaming. Just screaming, and I just couldn't help it. And my companion came rushing over and said, what's up? Have you cut yourself? He thought she was preparing something, and he was in another kind of state altogether as well. And she said, I had a dream. I had a dream about this event, and my belly button has this hole. And anyway, he said, oh. He said, well, I had a dream also, and I dreamt that some things have put a needle or inserted something into the shaft of my penis, and my God, it hurt like shit, is what he said. So he would never talk about that experience again, as you might expect. It's really super shocking. But then she goes on to talk about how 2 months later, she found herself pregnant. Again, this is very common after these reactions, events with women. So then she said she had a dream, and in this dream there was a blue light that shone on her house window now, and she actually remembers getting up and looking out of the window and thinking, oh no, it's them again. And she said, I thought to myself, the coyotes are back. But she said, I knew they weren't coyotes. I knew they weren't. And then she said, this is the 2 months later, sometime after that, she said, I wasn't pregnant anymore. There was no fetus, no bleeding, but this kind of event had happened to her before. I asked her if she'd had any interaction with her hybrid children, or I assume they were would-be hybrid children from what she told us. And she said that she had met a little girl whom they called Sarah, who always used to come with a guardian, who looked a little bit like Sarah, who she described as pretty, with large, large almond eyes, very blue irises and very white of the eyes, very white, and very sparse blonde hair, tiny little nose and a tiny little mouth. And then she said, and of the twins, she said there were twins. She said at first, now this is an event that she had during the night, and I think it shall explain itself. She said, at first when the first boy came, they were in bed asleep, she said, I thought it was a breaking and entering, so she thought the house was being burgled. And I was awoken from my sleep by a bright light. And then my bedroom door opened. I thought it was my son. But the person standing there was wearing sweatpants and a hoodie, it's the jacket with the hoods on, with the hood down. And the person came down and bent right down to my face, really close to me. I opened my eyes, and I just thought, oh my God, that person's got radiation burns. And I was really horrified, absolutely horrified. He looked like a burn victim, very little hair, and a sort of melted or partly missing features. There were no eyebrows, low lids, that's low eyelids, just a couple of wee nostrils, but not a nose, very thin lips, and not any kind of symmetry to the face, very tiny eyes. It really looked very deformed, a very round head like a pumpkin. She said, I was really horrified. And then I felt that the person was hurt, that I was so afraid, and it started talking in a voice that sounded at first like scraping glass, and then like a dolphin. And I'm certain I heard, or at least understood, the words sad and mother. And then my son came in and told me that he'd seen something similar in his own doorway, watching him sleep. But he said it was like a gargoyle, and it really looked demonic, and it really scared him. Now, this next illustration, is by a lady called Kay Wilson. And Kay Wilson has been having experiences from a very young age. She has a website called alienjigsaw.com. We have permission to use this image, and it's just a rough image of a baby she was handed. And she said its skin looked like it had been burned. And then she kind of reasoned, well, maybe it was just newly born, but it still didn't look normal. And she said the right side of its face appeared malformed and appeared not to have completely developed, the skull and the facial bones. So it seems that these mothers are brought in to interact with hybrid children time and time again, and often it's because there appears to be a very great lack of emotional ability with those who are taking care of the hybrid children to interact with them on an emotional level. So they often bring in the human mother to try and bond, and sometimes with the fathers too, but certainly, generally, with the mothers. So a few nights later, this lady's story continues. Another boy comes into her room, just as strongly as the previous one, but this time the hood is up, trying not to show his face. And at first she thought it was the same boy, but then she knew it wasn't. And then she thought, oh my God, it's my twins that I lost at 4 months. So that was a shocking realization for her. And she remembers the last thing that he said to her was, just love your mother. So I think that, on their side too, it can be quite sad. Quite sad that they don't have a unit to grow up in. I mean, who knows how they grow up, we don't know. But that clearly there is missing that loving, emotional, human element, which is so powerful, and I think is our trump card in our deck as a species. I asked her about the side effects, and I'm using this case because there are many side effects many people have, but these are just some of them that seem to have a resonance for a lot of people. She said, well, I have nightmares, or had nightmares, generally from 5 years to 14 years. She said there was bedwetting, there was sleepwalking, and then the pregnancies. And she said, and the buttonhole, the belly buttonhole, which took a year to heal. She said she'd felt a great sense of loneliness, of bereavement for the fetuses. And then she said, I also then began to have a fear of the people I was getting close to also having experiences. She said, because 2 of my relationships, they also began to have experiences. And that absolutely terrified them and finished the relationships. So this has massive impact for all of us. And she's not the first person to talk about that aspect either. There are many. And just going back to Simon again, and the reason I'm doing this is because there's a very good picture that was commissioned by a friend of Simon's to show really what the mantis look like. They are really like the insect we know as the praying mantis. And that would be kind of Simon. I think he was really tiny when this began. He was actually a baby in the cot, but also he remembers times before being born. But we'll stick to this life for the minute. So Simon was contacted by a lady called Mary Rodwell. Mary Rodwell is a nurse. She's an English lady who now lives in Australia, and she set up a resource in Australia doing pretty much what Miles and I are doing here. And she does hypnotherapy with people, and she does a lot of work in helping to deal with this and helping people come to terms with this. Now, this case is very interesting because there's a 10-year-old boy who Mary was contacting Simon about, because this young lad has had virtually exactly the same experiences that Simon had when he was a boy. And I think that's pretty extraordinary, you know. So this young lad has visits from the mantids. Now, one of the things that Simon said was that the mantids used to hold him up above their heads in a joyful way, like you might see mums and dads holding their babies above their heads, making them giggle. And he describes being held above a mantid's head while they make the happy sound. They really love their interactions. The mantids seem to have a very, very super high intellect, and they do seem to be gifted with compassion as well, which is great. So it was, and this had been happening before we had posted our videos about Simon's experience as well. So this has been going on for a little while with this young man. That's the boy's words, just as Simon was. And also, the boy had a dream, and he was flying and climbing up his bedroom wall, and Simon explained that what he was really doing was recreating the early days. Now, this is very hard for us to imagine. When mantids hatched out of a pupa and struggled up through the soft, swampy ground to break to the surface and their new life. But the really exciting thing for Simon, he says, is that the boy was taken out of his body and put into that of a mantid, just as Simon had been. So he could have that experience as well. So as you see, there are some extraordinary cases that we have, and everyone is different, but there are many correlations as well. This young man we interviewed, his name is Rashad Nawar. He lives in the southwest of England. And he contacted us because he'd been having a lot of experiences, but through his own means. He had been asking for some interaction. And I'm just going to tell you what he had to say about an occasion when he actually had physical contact with a grey. It's just a short clip.
Put its hands on my shoulders, and you know, as I said in the beginning, I still don't know what the astral body is, but that's where it put its hands.
But you could feel it solidly on your shoulders.
Absolutely, I could feel the pressure. It was completely tangible. It was very real, and it pushed me against the door. And its eyes were narrowed, as if to suggest concern. There were no thoughts. It was a very cold experience, very clinical.
And was it a shock for you to feel yourself being pushed against a wall?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The difference with this particular out-of-body experience and ET interaction was, whereas the first ones there'd be no emotion and I wasn't frightened, this one was such a shock because the first time round I'd only managed to see half of the head when I touched it, and that's when the experience ended. This time round it was a grey standing in front of me, full sort of, you know, very slim black suit. Yeah, black suit.
Okay. Sort of a skin tight. Sort of
skin tight. Yeah, all in one. Perhaps with a belt, but I didn't look that far down. I was just looking at this thing coming towards me, and it put its hand on my shoulders and just.
Was it at your height?
Slightly taller, just slightly taller, maybe a couple of inches taller. Put its hand on my shoulders and pushed me against the door, and its face came right up to mine. So
how tall are you, Resh, just for the record?
Between 5'6", 5'7".
Yeah, so, gosh, so it's a taller...
One of the taller ones, yeah. And it was such a shocking experience that I wouldn't say I was frightened, but I was definitely very concerned, and I didn't want this to happen. And I do remember saying, I really don't want to go this time. I don't want to go again. Please, you know, just stop it. You know, it wasn't like stop it with fear. It was just, for God's sake, you know, stop this. And I pushed my hand against its face, and I remember my fingers sort of going inside its mouth and pushing its lip up.
So when you did that, you made contact. Again, it felt physical. So you're making contact with the left or right side of its face.
Which way? Up, right hand.
Right hand
sort
side.
Sort of pushing up its
right
lip. Yeah, pushing it up that way. Yeah.
Were you aware of any teeth, or was it?
I was aware that there was something in the mouth, gum, teeth, whatever it was. Yeah, I didn't push my fingers all the way. There was something in there that stopped it.
Just the fact that you did that and it connected.
I mean, my fingers slid, touched something and slid against the inside of its mouth, which was why its lip got pushed up.
How did it feel?
That wasn't a particularly remarkable memory. I just remember that it was very tangible, and I pushed my fingers inside its mouth. The thing that stands out in terms of senses as well as touch and seeing the thing was the smell. It was very clinically biological, and the best comparison I can draw, which is a very strange comparison, but it's exactly what it smelled like, is being next to an elderly patient in a hospital ward.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't know how you describe that. I don't know whether, because a lot of people describe sort of sulfuric kind of smells, ammonia, and I don't know whether that even fits in. I can't quite bring that kind of hospital smell to mind, apart from the obvious disinfectant kind of smell. But anyway.
The funny thing is, I could probably draw that comparison because my parents owned a few residential homes.
Okay.
When I was, from when I was born, so I spent a lot of time around
that environment.
The elderly.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really interesting because I've never actually heard of anybody having that physical touching of a grey, and also the smell I think was really interesting. The smell, again, is something that comes up time and again. Resh was describing that his parents have an old people's home or nursing home. His mother is a nurse, his father's a psychiatric guy, nurse that is. And of course there's lots of disinfectant and medication smells, and he said often the smell that you get with very elderly people who are being cared for, it was relative to that kind of smell, which is very interesting. My slides have got slightly changed around. So I'm going to go on to this guy next, and this is Jeff Scott. I hadn't been aware before, because I'm not really, haven't really had the experience of this area of the rave scene. I don't know whether you know what I mean by the rave scene. It's a music scene, music events where a lot of people get together, and it's, you know, they tend to be quite massive. There's often a lot of recreational drugs going on, so lots of different states of consciousness present is, you know, what I'm talking about there. And this young man, again, when he came to do an interview with us, initially, in our initial sort of pre-interview stage, which I tend to do, he wouldn't speak on the phone to me because he lives in an area where there's lots of military activity and military bases in the UK, and he was being targeted by some military observers, let's call them, and was having a bit of a difficult time. So he drove up to see me and told me his story. And part of it was that a lot seemed to happen around the rave scene. I don't know what other word to describe that scene is, but interestingly enough, I had a guy from America call me and said that he'd just seen Jeff's video. And because of that, he wanted to tell me about his experiences, which he hadn't spoken to anybody about in 12 years. And it was very similar in that there were lots of dimensional shiftings going on during these events. And I can only put it down to the fact that there are very many altered states of consciousness, and with the music, the vibration, the frequency, and the element perhaps of control going on in those events, that it facilitates, let's say, interdimensional connectivity. So this is Jeff Scott. He's only on for a short while, just talking about an interaction that he believes was with a Pleiadian. Oh, have I done it again? Bear with me a second.
The next thing I know, that there's like a chap sat in a chair facing me. Mm-hmm. And he's handed me a small, highly polished, dark stone. Mm-hmm. At the time, I had a lot of respect for people that like stones and sticks and the outdoors, because I'm an outdoor kind of person. He's, without saying anything, he's just handed me this stone.
It's unusual.
I took it off him, kissed it, said, yeah, nice stone, man, and given it back.
As a mark of respect.
Yeah. And then there's a pause. I went to say a sentence. I'm not sure what it was about. It was probably about girls or music or something. I've gone to speak a sentence. He spoke it for me. I've gone to speak another sentence. He spoke that one for me before I could get a word out. He's spoken these two sentences. After the second one, he's spoken for me. I said, how did you know I was going to say that? Which he didn't answer me. He proceeded to speak for about 2 or 3 minutes of some kind of wisdom, which obviously went in at the time. I can't remember it for the life of me, what he said, but it went in at the time. I remember taking it in. About 3 minutes. And then he got up, and I didn't actually see him get up, but he left. He wasn't there anymore. He just wasn't sat on the chair.
What did he look like, this being? More or less.
I'd say between late 20s, early 30s. I can't remember for the life of me but what he was dressed in, whether he had a baseball cap or not. I seem to remember his hair was probably shoulder length, fair. I don't remember anything about his physical appearance more than that.
Interesting. Yeah.
But about 7 years later, I was listening to some information or something or other. Someone was speaking and giving some information. They happened to mention that the race called the Pleiadians, they initiate face-to-face contact when they come down and speak to people. They initiate their contact by handing the person a stone. And
that's interesting. I hadn't heard that before.
When I heard this, I thought, my God.
So there we go. He was really convinced that he had met a Pleiadian on the back of what he'd heard on a radio program some years later, which described the Pleiadians as initiating contact by handing people a shining stone. So Jeff has a lot more to say and tell about his experiences, but I just wanted you to have that little bit because I just thought that was very interesting because of the download that Jeff appeared to have, which he doesn't currently remember, and also that he doesn't really remember the guy leaving, and also how he looked, and yet he was sitting in front of him. So it seems that these beings are finding different ways to interact with us, and I think this, again, that the energies are making this more and more available as the energies change now. Because I have also a great interest in health and wellness, I always look to the complementary field to see if there is any way we can help. I am plugged into several different kinds of practitioners, and one of my contacts is a master homeopath, and she suggested that Thuya, I think that's how you pronounce it, which is a homeopathic remedy often used in the treatment of addictions, which is interesting too because a lot of the experiences can have experiences where they find themselves becoming slightly obsessive about certain processes, often out of anxiety. In cases of sexual abuse for the predator and the experiencer, this is a really great remedy. And plenty of our people, especially the ladies, have had a lot of experience with this hybrid business and may, again, find some benefit from this. We would love to do some research on this, and it's what we hope to set up down the line, is to really try and see if this kind of thing helps, because it is other dimensional medicine as well. Thuya is also used very much in cases of possession, entity incursion, that kind of thing. So again, sometimes people feel that they're being stepping in and stepping out. And again, I think that we can say, you know what, this far and no further. If you want to interact with me, then it is with my consent and agreement. And I think we have to find a way to make this happen. And I'm just trying to find ways of supporting this particular group of people and any others who need it with some practical tools and help. And for example, in hand reflexology, in any reflexology, but in the hand because it's easier, on this part of the hand which I'm showing, it's just the this big part of the thumb here. I haven't got a picture of it, I'm sorry, but just about 2 fingers down from where the thumb begins is the adrenal point. And the adrenals often get exhausted when there are entity involvement, or whether there's ET or interdimensional activity. People often get exhausted and tired. And it is often a point of contact and anchor for those who have entities, incursions. So when we tone up our adrenals and give them a rest, there is less ability. And so that's raising our vibration and frequency. There is less ability for any of those things to take place, to anchor in. Now, I don't know whether any of you have heard of the emotional freedom technique, often known in the UK as EFT and America, I believe. And it's really just a very, very simple, very easy process. One lady's doing it there to, I can't demonstrate it, to recalibrate the consciousness. And that is a fantastic technique. I do believe that we can do this gently. I don't think we have to hurt ourselves or harm ourselves more with heavy drugs or anything like that. But you know what? If people are already in the psychiatric care, if you like, then it may be that that's where they have to stay until they can have the strength and their body chemistry is able to deal with that. I've just put this slide up. I know you probably won't be able to read all of it, and it's a larger document. I just thought it was wonderful because the humansovereignty.org people have written this Declaration of Human Sovereignty regarding contact with extraterrestrial nations and forces. And I won't go through all that it says, but one of the things it does say is the right to sovereignty. And I'm absolutely up for that. I really want my personal sovereignty to be absolute And I want that for all of you guys too. And I think we can have that. I don't think just because these things have been going on for maybe millennia that we can't change them. So, you know, I'll let you know, I'll keep you up to date with how we go on that one. The other thing it talks about is the right of planetary sanctity and the right of sanctity of biological and genetic material. Well, we know that that's not the case at the moment, but it's, you know, it's something to work towards. If any of you want to look up this document, you can find it under sovereignty.org. There you go, didn't have my teeth in there. Amash, we're very lucky to have a most amazing guy called Jack Mason do some artwork for us for our coming conference later this year, end of August, September. I just wanted to share that artwork with you. And this is the first time probably a full 3-day conference has been put together on the experiences. So we're having mainly experiencers speaking. We'll have several speakers who are going to be researchers talking about various allied subjects. But the great thing is that we're going to have mainly experiencers. So this will be the first time that we've had so many putting their story first and telling it their own way. So it's very exciting. So we want to put this thing on the map of serious research. We think that's really important. And Igor, maybe you could tell me how much time we've got? Oh, he's not hearing me. I don't know how much time am I through? Have we done? Sorry, I forgot to bring my, my watch up with me. I want to say some other stuff, but if we're finished, we're... Okay, all righty. Well, listen, guys, I just want another couple of minutes then just to share with you. I meant to say this at the beginning, but the talk that was on your sheets there was not the talk I've given. It was really about AMASH and what we're doing and what we're about in the UK being a new resource. But it did have suppressed technology. Well, that's a real field that I'm very interested in. And in the UK, there is a gentleman by the name of Professor John Searle. John Searle created something called the SEG. That stands for the Searle Effect Generator. And if you want to look up more information about his story, do go to thesearlestory.com. It's very interesting. It's spelled S-E-A-R-L, and John Searle. I will just say that he's now 80 years old, still living, still alive and kicking, as he says. We're in contact fairly regularly. But this machine that he devised, which he did at 14 years old, by mistake, and then he realized what he'd done. He was actually trying to create electricity because 1 year after the war, 1946, everybody was really poor and nobody could afford to pay for utilities. So that's what he was doing. He was a real great altruistic guy. Anyway, over time, he created lots of prototypes. And the BBC, believe it or not, used to film him in the 60s and 70s. And you'll be surprised to know that those archives are no longer available. They have disappeared. But they did used to film John flying his prototype. And this prototype could go 300 or 400 miles in 3 minutes. I mean, that's extraordinary. And this was proven, recorded, and done. It also had a healing benefit. Now, I don't know if you know what I mean by negative ions, and in English it's IONS. The negative ions are what makes us feel very good. When the place is full of positive ions, it makes you feel tired, heady, etc. But negative ions are what helps speed up our healing process. And some years ago, many years ago, John had a very severe facial burn from an oil explosion. And he had an SEG that he was working with on hand. Now, the SEG also uses ambient energy. Ambient energy is the energy that we have in our air right now. It pulls it in and it uses it automatically. And this thing runs cold. It becomes superconductive. So it doesn't take it doesn't heat up with energy, it actually gets much colder. So what this did, John's injuries healed up, and you can't tell that he's ever had a burn, which is phenomenal because his whole face was burnt, and his neck. and there is no sight of any injury. And the hospital couldn't believe it because it took about 3 weeks for that to heal. And they put it down to the fact that he was in a highly negatively ionized environment. So I just want to say to you that we have all the things that we need right here, right now on the planet. We've got all the healing tools we need. There is a Russian healing system which is now regenerating organs. And this is fact, and you can, again, go and see that yourself or talk to me afterwards, and I'll give you the right place to go and look at it. But I just want to say thank you very much. I hope you found it interesting. Again, to Igor and everybody else, and those two girlies in the booth there. Thank you very much, ladies. You're working really hard. That's brilliant. Thanks from Amash. Thank you.